In the heart of the Old West, the land is more than just a patch of ground. It's a battlefield where honor, law, and survival intertwine. The vast desert stretches as far as the eye can see, with mountains and dry valleys that speak of centuries of untold stories. The sun blazes the sky, making the air hot and heavy, while a gentle breeze lifts the dust from the dirt road, carrying with it the smell of rusted metal and distant smoke. It is in this desolate landscape that our story unfolds, where what was, once a land of opportunity, has become a terrain of contention and tension. The arid landscape of the West reflects the relentless struggle for survival, and in this inhospitable environment, tension arises between two forces: the Cowboys, heroes of the countryside living outside the law, and the settlers seeking to establish a new empire. What began as a place of freedom and dreams is now being transformed by the arrival of new laws that favor the powerful, while the small, the strong, and the fearless are forced to fight for their lands, their families, and their dignity. With new impositions of authority and an economy that seems to crush anyone without power, the West transforms into a battleground between those seeking control and those with nothing to lose. Local authorities, ruthless and blind to the Cowboys' struggle, step in with their decrees and impositions, demanding more than the land can bear. Tensions mount, and the promise of a better future begins to fade on the horizon. However, amidst the dust and wind, the rebellious spirit of some cowboys begins to grow. Those disillusioned by corrupt authorities begin to unite, forging a resistance against oppression, fueled by a deep desire for justice. With growing injustice, the people of the West begin to realize that things cannot go on like this. The now inevitable struggle is approaching, and the Cowboys, their pride wounded and their hearts inflamed with rage, prepare to challenge the system. The Wild West is no longer a place of promises of freedom, but a battlefield where the fate of all will be decided in the hands of those who rise up against tyranny. It all begins with an act of oppression. The Cowboys, who until then had struggled to live their own way without interference, begin to feel the weight of the authorities on their shoulders. The government, thirsty for more control and profit, begins implementing new laws that strip the Cowboys of the lands they had so hard won. The struggle for survival turns into a struggle for dignity when a group of corrupt settlers, allied with the authorities, begins to pressure small farmers and rural workers, forcing them off their lands and attempting to take what doesn't belong to them. The trigger is triggered when one of the Cowboys' greatest allies, a simple but respected man, is unjustly arrested for a crime he didn't commit. The local sheriff, a ruthless and corrupt man, takes advantage of the small rancher's vulnerability and uses his power to overthrow the man who was once one of the region's most respected figures. The protagonist, a fearless cowboy who knows the laws of the West like no other, witnesses this act and for the first time feels that the weight of oppression has reached an intolerable level. The final touch of revolt comes when the family of a cowboy whose land was being taken is brutally threatened and forced to leave, leaving behind everything they had done. At this moment, blood boils. The injustice committed against a man who, in turn, always fought for his people, ignites the flame of revolt. The Cowboys, who until then lived on the margins of society, feel there is no longer any way to bow to the system. Oppression has reached an untenable point. There is no longer any choice. Resistance is necessary. But it is not just any resistance. It is fueled by a deep desire for justice and the belief that even against all adversity, it is possible to reverse the course of history. The uprising is already taking shape, and the Cowboys, united by the pain of loss, prepare to face the forces of the oppressive system. Revolt begins to take shape in the eyes of those who have been humiliated, and the calloused hands of the countrymen, and in the hearts of those who have already lost everything. It's time to react. There is no turning back. The system will never be the same, and the Cowboys will not be defeated by those who, with their cruel laws, try to crush their hopes. The sound of boots scuffing through the dust is now louder than ever. The once dispersed group of Cowboys begins to unite, driven by the same pain and anger. In a small, isolated tavern in the heart of the West, leaders begin to emerge. The protagonist, with his experience of country life and his vision of justice, becomes the link that connects the disparate groups. He, along with other seasoned Cowboys, begins to form a resistance network with the clear goal of fighting against the impositions of a corrupt system that oppresses the people of the West. As the movement gains momentum, more and more Cowboys join the cause. Some are war veterans, others are young men who have never seen battle, but have the courage to stand up for what they believe in. Each of them brings with them a story of loss and pain, which now transforms into determination and a desire for freedom. With this, the resistance movement is not just an armed struggle, but also a fight for identity and dignity. They are no longer just men of the land. They are symbols of a coming revolution, and the weight of each gesture is felt by all. However, not everyone within the movement is in complete agreement. Some prefer to attack the forces of the system directly, without worrying about collateral damage. Others, more cautious, believe that more planning and strategy are needed to prevent the revolt from being lost in the chaos. The resistance leader, the protagonist, finds himself forced to balance these two perspectives, that of a more impetuous group, which wants immediate action, and that of a more calculating group, which wants to ensure that the struggle is not in vain. The moral dilemma is profound, and the line between justice and violence begins to blur. What is more important, victory at any cost or the preservation of values? The movement begins to take concrete form. Resistance is no longer a distant dream. It is a reality that is taking shape every day. The Cowboys, now more united than ever, begin to form bold plans. Every action is strategically planned, and every step taken is an attempt to infiltrate the system and weaken it from within. The courage and determination of each Cowboy becomes palpable. They are ready to fight. The first battle, though uncertain, is only the beginning of an uprising that promises to shake the foundations of the West. The silence preceding the confrontation is broken by the roar of gunfire in the distance. The Cowboys, now in full motion, begin their first actions, ambushing small troops and groups of settlers representing the oppressive system. The resistance, still in formation, uses guerrilla tactics, taking advantage of the rugged terrain and vastness of the desert to attack unexpectedly and quickly. There is no room for direct confrontation. The objective is to gradually weaken the enemy, creating psychological and physical wear and tear until the system collapses of its own accord. The first ambush is a partial success. The resistance manages to capture a batch of vital supplies and destroy a weapons depot. However, the cost of this victory is high. The militia, now alert, begins to pursue the Cowboys with greater intensity. Each attack generates a more brutal response. Meanwhile, the resistance leader realizes that the game is changing. The enemy, once distant and unattainable, is now closer than ever, and the rebels' every move must be calculated with greater precision. The confrontation begins to show its true face. A war not only physical, but also mental. The resistance begins to mature in its tactics, and the more experienced Cowboys assume leadership roles, guiding the younger ones in sabotage and rapid attacks. They raid isolated strongholds, hide in caves and canyons, and become ghosts in the desert. Each successful mission strengthens morale, but also increases the risk of violent reprisals. The protagonist, aware of the imminent dangers, begins to weigh the costs of this struggle. On the one hand, victory seems within reach, but on the other, the sacrifices begin to mount. The line between the just and the unjust begins to blur as the Cowboys are forced to make decisions that previously seemed unthinkable. Between the confrontations, there's also room for doubt. The younger Cowboys begin to question what they're really fighting for. They're losing friends, seeing their homes destroyed, and feeling the weight of violence on their shoulders. The resistance leader, who has always been steadfast in his belief that the fight for freedom is worth any sacrifice, now faces an internal battle. Does the fight for justice justify the means being used? This question weighs heavily on the leader's soul, but he knows the resistance cannot turn back. The battle is now a matter of survival. Either they win, or the West will be consumed by oppression once and for all. As a revolution begins to gain momentum, the risk of betrayal becomes inevitable. In moments of greatest tension, trust among resistance members begins to weaken, and the enemy finds a way to infiltrate the movement. The first major betrayal occurs when one of the secondary leaders, someone with a murky past and ties to the local government, reveals himself as an informant. This man, whose name was known and respected by the Cowboys, begins passing crucial information to the authorities, putting the lives of everyone in the movement at risk. The immediate reaction is shock and disbelief. How could someone who shared the same struggle betray his own comrades? The resistance leader, in particular, finds himself torn between the need for justice and the urgency of survival. What to do with a traitor? The law of the West is simple. Either you survive or you are overthrown. But the morality of the situation begins to weigh on decisions. To maintain the group's unity and prevent the total collapse of the resistance, swift and severe punishment must be meted out. But the execution of the punishment breeds internal divisions. With the betrayal, trust among the Cowboys begins to fracture. The leader's closest allies now view each other with suspicion, and even those who were once most ideologically minded are forced to question the loyalty of those around them. However, the real battle begins to rage in the hearts and minds of the rebels. Some believe the only way to win is with more brutality, without hesitation, while others, more idealistic, try to reclaim the original vision of the fight for justice. Distrust creates an environment of uncertainty where even the smallest actions can be misinterpreted. In an atmosphere of paranoia, No one knows who to trust, not even the people they have fought side by side with for so long. Meanwhile, the government-hired bounty hunter, now armed with valuable information about the Resistance's weaknesses, intensifies the pursuit. The Circle tightens, and the Cowboys find themselves in an increasingly vulnerable position. Internal betrayal combined with external repression places the Resistance in an extremely precarious situation. The movement is no longer an ideological struggle for justice. Now it is a fight for survival. Each step taken is riskier, and each of the Cowboys must choose. Continue the fight, despite betrayal and distrust, or abandon the cause and save their own lives. The tension built up throughout the revolt culminates in the most decisive moment of all, the great battle that will determine the fate of the entire West. The Cowboys, now a resilient force, prepare for the final confrontation with the colonial and military forces who surround the last town to be taken by the rebels. The setting is the vast desert, where the scorching heat and difficult terrain will be both allies and enemies. With the advantage of surprise, the Cowboys devise a daring plan that uses the terrain to their advantage. They know they cannot face the enemy in open ground, so they set traps and ambushes, a guerrilla tactic that, while risky, is the only way to guarantee any chance of victory. The first hours of the battle are intense and chaotic. The sound of gunfire reverberates across the desert as the Cowboys attack from strategic points, using the rock formations and hills as shields. The movement is swift, almost ghostly, but the Resistance begins to suffer losses. Each fallen Cowboy is a deep pain for his comrades, and the leader of the revolt finds himself torn. Continue fighting, knowing victory is within reach, or save what remains of the group and retreat. The confrontation is far from simple. Amidst the chaos, the leader feels the weight of his decisions, while the hot desert wind blows, taking with it the hopes of some, but also the determination of others. Just when the battle seems lost, an unexpected element enters the scene. The Resistance, already weakened, receives reinforcements from other Cowboys and figures who had been expelled from their lands or persecuted by the government. The leader, in a desperate act of courage, decides to take a risky action, a direct attack on the enemy stronghold, where the commanders and the main representatives of oppression are located. He leads the offensive with immeasurable courage, knowing that this will be his last chance to overthrow the system once and for all. The battle reaches its climax when the leader faces the main antagonist, the sheriff, who represents corrupt power, in a bloody and decisive duel in the heart of the stronghold. The duel between the revolt leader and the sheriff is brutal and personal. Both are fighting for everything they've lost, and each blow carries the pain of past injustices. When the dust settles and silence descends, the sheriff is down, but not before leaving a final message to the leader. Victory is never final. Power always returns. The fight never ends. This last sentence, filled with bitterness, resonates in the leader's mind, who, exhausted, sees the battle's end, but also realizes that the war for justice will never have a definitive end. Even with victory within reach, he knows that the West, though free from oppression, will never be the same again. With the victory over the oppressive system, the Western landscape begins to change, but the cost of this revolution proves higher than the Cowboys could have imagined. The final battle may have been won, but the fight for freedom has left deep scars. The resistance leader, despite achieving his goal of overthrowing the corrupt government and liberating the Cowboys' land, pays the highest price for his choices. On a final mission, while trying to protect the survivors and ensure the victory is consolidated, he is fatally wounded. The man who for so long was a symbol of hope, strength, and justice now finds himself on the brink of death, aware that true freedom will not come without sacrifice. The leader's sacrifice is not only physical, but emotional. He always believed the revolution was a noble cause, that the fight for justice would be justified under any circumstances. But now, with his life slipping away, he begins to question whether the price was truly worth it. On his deathbed, he looks at his comrades and feels a mixture of pride and sadness. They achieved what they wanted, but what to do now? How to live in a world where the fight for freedom has already turned into pain and loss? The vision of a prosperous and free future seems more distant than ever, as he finds himself pierced by the pain of a revolution that, although victorious, left the battlefield littered with dead and broken hearts. The surviving Cowboys, led by a new commander, perhaps a young man their leader instructed, or an unexpected member who distinguished himself during the struggle, now face an existential dilemma. How to rebuild what was destroyed, how to heal the wounds opened by violence. The one who was the symbol of the revolution is gone, and with him, a piece of the very spirit of resistance. However, his death serves as a catalyst for the remaining Cowboys to unite in the name of the legacy of struggle and courage he left behind. They vow to follow the cause to the end, honoring the sacrifices made, but knowing that the path will be lonely and fraught with challenges. Despite the pain and the loss, the leader's death has a transformative effect. It ignites a new flame of determination in the survivors. They know that true freedom is an ongoing process, something that must be defended and preserved every day. The leader's sacrifice is not the end, but a milestone on the journey. Now, with the land freed from the clutches of the oppressive system, it is up to them to preserve what they have achieved. The leader's memory and the sacrifices made during the uprising become a symbol of eternal resistance, something that will be passed down from generation to generation. The struggle for freedom, though painful, becomes a legacy that cannot be erased. After the great battle and sacrifice that sealed the fate of the revolution, the West begins to transform before the eyes of the surviving Cowboys. The victory, won with so much blood and sweat, is not an end, but the beginning of a new era, one where the land finally belongs to its rightful owners, and where the oppression of corrupt authorities has finally been defeated. However, the cost was immense. The scars of war still mark the landscape, both on the land and in the hearts of those who survived. What was once a land of promise is now a place of rebuilding, where the Cowboys, now leaders of a new order, must face the challenge of cultivating peace after a brutal revolution. The survivors, guided by the memory of their fallen comrades and the legacy of the leader who gave his life for freedom, begin working to ensure that the lessons of the uprising are not forgotten. The justice they so desperately sought does not come without challenges, and the fear that oppressive forces might rise again never completely disappears. However, the courage and unity that emerge from the ashes of battle become the foundation of a new society in the West. There is no longer room for tyranny. Now, the West belongs to the men and women who lived it, those who fought for it, and those who have the courage to preserve its freedom. As the Cowboys attempt to rebuild their lives and lands, the story of the revolt spreads on the desert winds, becoming a legend that will be told for generations. The name of the resistance leader who sacrificed everything for the cause will be remembered as a symbol of the fight for freedom. His story, full of courage and pain, inspires others not to surrender in the face of injustice, reminding everyone that, even in times of oppression, there is always a moment when the oppressed rise up to challenge tyranny. The West, though freer, remains a wild place where the fight for justice never ends. The flame of revolution, though silent now, burns forever in the western lands. And in the end, as the desert wind blows again, the leader's words resonate in everyone's minds. The fight for freedom never ends. It only changes form, but the courage of those who seek it never fades.